Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm really excited to be here. I should start off by saying that I'm neither, as you can probably guess from the intro, an economist nor a social scientist. My background is actually in quantitative fisheries ecology. I was poached by the social science economics group in the Office of Science and Technology because of my quantitative skills and to help update a lot of these antiquated processes in the office and help the office contemporize our products and better serve the public. NOAA Fisheries produces, well, actually they produce a lot of important reports, but my office in particular, Office of Science and Technology, produces two premier reports, many reports, but there's two that are particularly important to us. One is the annual Fisheries Economics of the U.S. report, what I'll call FEUS. And that's not to be confused with the Fisheries of the U.S. report, which talks about our fisheries in terms of catch in number and pounds and so forth. But FEUS takes it one step beyond that. FEUS describes how U.S. fishing affects the economy in terms of employment. So captain, crew, wholesalers, importers, restaurateurs, grocers, the sales that incur from that, how much a fish is worth at each stage from the harvester to retail, and the value added impacts, how much the money transferred from the employee's family to services affects the U.S. economy. The FEUS covers national, coastal, regional, and coastal state level summaries, which, we have 7 major regions that we cover: New England, the Mid-Atlantic, South Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, Pacific, North Pacific, and West Pacific. And the 23 collective coastal states that are highlighted here. For each of these areas, we cover 10 years of economic performance data for the commercial, recreational, and marine economy industries. Commercial fishing, the commercial section uses landings, revenue, price, and economic impacts data. Recreational section includes effort data, how often an angler will go out and fish for fish, participation rates, and expenditure information. And the marine economy section provides context on employer and non-employer establishment, payroll, annual receipt information for fishing related industries. As you can imagine, this adds up between 31 different areas, 3 different sections, and 5 or so different elements, a crude oversimplification of what goes into this report. We need about 511 separate key report elements that go into this report. As you can see here, she's hefty. She's a big report. And that doesn't even mention all the mid-step products that come out of this code for different collaborators, different reports that use our data and online web tools. But what goes into this report is really just one step of this process. As a nationally important report, there's a lot of people who get involved at different stages of the process. First, subject matter experts, I'll call them SMEs for short, collect the data, then they determine caveats of the data. Is the data going to cover all these things? Do we need to write notes about things it doesn't cover or covers more than? Can't separate data out, so forth. The report editor prepares the report. I'm the report editor. The subject matter experts review the report content. The designer prepares the report, infographics, and the fact sheet. Then they 508 the report. We'll talk about what that means later. And then the series editor signs off on the report after having read it through. Leadership reviews and approves the report, and then it's rolled out for public release. As I said, my predecessors really only focused on this one part of the process for the data that they either did or didn't receive. However, as you'll see in this presentation, I have really taken on the task of trying to manage these 6 different parts of this report production process, which is really exciting, but also a massive task. And to do that, there's a couple of key things that we need to do to really improve the report creations process. for the long term and in terms of reproducibility. To name the main culprits at this point in the redevelopment of this report, we wanted to automate data downloads and access to that data. We wanted to streamline the report creation. We wanted consistent grammar structure throughout the report. That was not the case before. Built-in 508 accessibility, we'll chat about what that means. Version control is so important, and flexibility in the types of outputs that we could produce from this code. The first offender would absolutely be the access to the raw data. Previously, the report editor would have data managers in the office and across the regions put together data that we need for the report. Talking about a lot of people here, a lot of middlemen. I have no problems with my predecessor. It wasn't their job to collect this data, and they are not a data person, and they did a great job with what they had. But as you can imagine, asking a bunch of people to provide data to send to your inbox to then have someone else format can cause massive, massive delays in even just starting the report. While it took a long time to convince people to hand over the data access to me, delegating tasks from contributors can be a sore point in any situation. I now have direct access to national and regional data sets that go into this report. And it was actually a lot easier to do than you might think, getting connections to Oracle and to these online websites. My code does that. When I first started, there actually were some R scripts and R Markdown files that had already been created for each section. Several years before my time, I don't know the story exactly, but someone had tried to completely automate this report, but I think that they were to limited avail. As you can see, unfortunately, a lot of the files were missing or simply never created. Files were poorly named, shared multiple tasks, often were extremely incomplete or occasionally incorrect. I know my predecessor had to do a lot of line-by-line editing, and the scripts were helpful, but often not trustworthy. Today, a lot has changed since then. Now, each section lives in an R project and is run by what I call a run file. Well, it's actually a run.r file, it's a script. So the run file is a script that controls the production of each section. First, the run file pulls a common function file that is applied to all sections of the report. This common functions file is drawn from a common R project. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the nice thing about that is it controls for uniform editing of the text and the tables that go into this report, among many other background tasks. Then the script loads or downloads data via the data.r script and loads section-specific functions from the functions.r script. And then, so we've created all the content that's pretty much going to go into this report. We can now finally start writing the report. National has some specific elements that are run uniquely, so it's its own file. But because the region and the state subsections are so formulaic, they're the same from one to the next. We just loop through, we simply use this R script to loop through those R Markdown files with the relevant data and put those in. This strict and uniform process for each section will help collaborators and those who come after me to follow my workflow and to make it easier to understand where things could have gone wrong, and with simply reproducing this process for years to come. That was obviously not easy before. In this section, our Markdown file for before was not a perfect system. Those files, or what existed in them anyway, would include most sections in one file, and they were really unorganized and incomplete, missing text, figures, tables that would go into this report. As you can see, if you guys can see my video cam, there's a lot of content that goes into these reports that's not just text. The code, so they were often incomplete. The code clearly duplicated itself from one section to the next. And so they would just simply change the name of the R object that was being used in that section. It's extremely inefficient, but They would also hard code in items like the year, right, which would change from year to year in an annual report. And the code wasn't dynamic enough to deal with unit control or grammar. So elements like 8,000, 1,000, it should be a million, right? Like there is no 8,000, 1,000. And 8% as a number that starts with a vowel should be preceded by an N, not an A. But the code before wasn't dynamic enough to deal with those issues. This new code corrects for a lot of the things that were wrong in the old code. Firstly, these sections are complete for all parts of the report, text, tables, figures of the document. As shown before, the regional and state table sections are run to the same RMARKDOWN files with just different data, right? And it's the same stuff, just changing the name of the region or the state. Data is dynamically entered in each RMARKDOWN file, year, region, state, changed depending on the data that is provided when the script is run through the run.r file. And finally, I created functions that take the number to determine the appropriate unit for the value, and functions like, in this case of another function I created, %x, which determines if the value has increased or decreased, and if an A or an N, for example, should be preceded by the % number. And these are just two small examples of how dynamic grammatical editing has been applied to this document and has expedited so much of the line-by-line editing process. There's a lot of trust in how this is structured to produce a copy edit ready report by the end of this process. Section 508 is a totally different issue. It is an amendment to the U.S. Workforce and Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and all federal agencies, it affects the online products, websites, PDFs, etc., of all federal agencies to give better access to people with disability. Anything that comes out of NOAA is no different. The functional purpose of any product of this amendment is to make any product that comes out of these federal agencies searchable by screen and text readers so that people with disabilities can interact with the content of these products. Sorry. In R, there are a few ways we can help our designers by making parts of this report 508 compliant, even from the get-go, out of the box, out of the initial run of this code. Firstly, we need to make these files readable and flowable into Adobe InDesign with the appropriate tag sections like H2, paragraphs, footnotes, so forth. And as of this report, we are producing an HTML web tool version of this report that will allow the impaired to access this data in a more dynamic way and play with this data in a way more dynamic way. We've also recently updated some of the colors and fonts that go into this report to make them more friendly to the disabled community. And it's a hugely important thing that we're doing and pushing ourselves to do better. As you can see here, I've got a bit of text from my RMARKDOWN document with the headers listed, and then how they translate into tags in a PDF document. In that same way, you can also customize the styles to match the way you want your report to look like by adding word style reference documents into your YAML of your RMARKDOWN document. This document is essentially just a regular docx Word document file where you have defined what your headers should be, what they should look like. And you can see how that translates into a PDF version of this report. Version control has been crucial to this process. There were so many things going on, so many antiquated pieces of code you're trying to keep up. Version control helps with that immensely. Not only am I updating much of how the report is physically being created, but I'm also keeping track of like things that we are just updating from old text to new tables to so forth. To keep track of that, I created these projects for each section so I can annotate the changes I made to each section and each script as they come up. For script outputs that need to be shared with my less tech-savvy colleagues, however, I have created a uniform file saving structure. Every time a script is run, it creates a dated output file with uniform subfolders for chapters, output tables, metadata, raw data, the data that went into the analysis, and the R scripts that were used for the analysis. The metadata file that I've also created documents when the analysis was run, what version of R it was run on, and what version of packages were used to run those files. So my colleagues can easily review the content of these outputs from anywhere and comment on them collaboratively. I share the entire folder on Google Drive, and I just copy and paste it. It's got a unique name and very strict and uniform file naming structure. And that's important for my colleagues to know what to look for from section to section. The files are named in order for which they appear in the report, and they're explicitly named for the content that is in that file. So here you can see 0_2_1_0_comms text, US comms text, right? So that's the commercial section of the US section, and it's providing, in this case, it's a figure. At the end of the day, these 4 projects produce approximately 250 pages of content that go directly into this report. But in reality, the code and these projects do a lot more than just that. They also produce fact sheets and infographics that are used as part of the report rollout. The report is used by Congress to understand how fisheries in the United States affects the economy and the US public. For external reports and fact sheets such as the Saltwater Recreational Fisheries Snapshots report produced by NOAA Fisheries Office of Sustainable Fisheries, and to create JavaScript files that are used directly for our online tool. But the job is far from over. There is a lot waiting in the wings for the future. This report likely hasn't seen much love in the past 10 years, and I'm working to continue contemporizing the contextual and descriptive content of this report. There are analyses that still need to be converted from Excel to R for faster and more confident runs. It's one thing to get the data, it's one thing to fry these Excel calculators that your bosses developed 15 years ago to update them into a more formidable output structure. Also to include more analyses that the office is working on that should be included to provide more context for the economic state of the fisheries in the United States. And overall, more to be done to improve the turnaround time of this report, so maybe better able to coordinate with the release of other nationally important reports, like, as I was talking about earlier, Fisheries of the US report. And with that, I'm just on time. Thanks to my colleagues who helped me with this. I'm open to any questions, comments, or insight. If you want to know more, feel free to email me or contact me on social media. Thanks, everyone.